Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying for this last paper of the session. I know it's after lunch and everybody's a little bit sleepy, but today I'm going to be sharing some of our long-term badging work. I'm Caroline, and my co-authors are Adam Bell, Edgar Onofre, and Katie Davis, and we're from the University of Washington Information School. And I would like to start out with a question. How many of you have received an email saying, oh, we're going to be switching to a new payroll system, or we're going to be switching our course management software to a new system, and just you get this email and you have no choice and you have to switch and it's a new system that you have to use, and how does that make you feel? Does that feel great, or does that feel like, oh no, now I have to change everything to this new system? Or maybe some of you have sent those emails or created that new system. So have we. We've spent the past several years working on a new digital badging system for an ongoing program. So this program at the Pacific Science Center called the Discovery Corps has been ongoing, a youth science interpretation program for several years. So we've just, in the past several years, implemented a digital badging program. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with what a digital badge is. But for those of you who are not, even though it was mentioned in Sebastian's presentation a couple of presentations ago, digital badges are generally little icons with some embedded metadata. In this case, we're specifically talking about them for learning. So given in after-school programs or different digital learning programs to provide a way of tracking learning pathways and demonstrating learning achievements across settings. So in our particular case, we're looking at how do we design badge systems that align with the needs and values of the stakeholder groups that we're particularly working with. And in particular, we want to look at how do we develop badge systems for long-term use? How do we implement the badge system and design it in such a way that it's going to be used over a long period of time, that when we implement it and leave, they don't just go back to what they were doing before. They don't say, oh, this system is no longer being supported. We want to go back to the way we were doing things earlier. So we want to particularly focus on this longer-term implementation and how to really incorporate the digital badge system into the day-to-day operations and the workflow of the system. So the Pacific Science Center is a science center in Seattle with whom we have a research practice partnership, and in particular, we're working with the Pacific Science Center Discovery Corps, which is a group of youth science interpreters who work at the Science Center and engage in both work activities and learning activities. So they develop a variety of science skills and so on, and we work directly with them in a participatory design setting. And so in particular, we want to look at how this work can be used to enhance implementation in the program. So our first research question was, over the past several years, what challenges did stakeholders face during the implementation of the digital badge system? Question 2, how can implementation challenges that we surfaced earlier be anticipated and incorporated into the initial design process and the ongoing design? And what role can this ongoing co-design process play during the long-term implementation of a badge system? So in order to do this, we wanted to look at our large corpus of qualitative data that we've collected over the past several years. So in order to do that, we want to talk about the project timeline. It actually started before this with pilot work, but the first official year of the program was in 2015-2016. So in that first year, there were the initial design sessions and the initial surveys and interviews with the students, as well as the initial interviews with a group of community stakeholders, college admissions officers, local tech company, human resources representatives to discuss the potential use in job applications and so on. And then in 2016-2017 was the badge system launch and iterative design and testing, incorporation of new features, discussions with the students, further design sessions. In 2017-2018, feature updates, follow-up surveys and interviews and so on. And now we are currently in 2018-2019, where we've incorporated some of the things we've learned earlier and are engaging in long-term case studies, trainings, and other activities. So the data sources that we're using in this particular study are several of these sources from these different years, including the various interviews, the surveys, some of the analytics from the website, all of the session memos, meeting notes, design artifacts. So it's quite a lot of different materials. So it's quite a lot to analyze. But how we analyzed was through an iterative qualitative coding process. So we built on previous work in terms of a qualitative coding scheme that was created through repeated revisions and triangulation with additional data sources, such as our meeting notes and so on. And then we, over time, discussing with the different project team members and the different coders, refined the code book, and then proceeded to the final key challenges that we discovered. So moving on to the findings, we found 3 main categories of badge implementation challenges. The 3 main challenges that emerged were sociotechnical, which focused on the badge system within the day-to-day operations of the program, because when you're inserting a new kind of technology, a new sociotechnical system into an existing program that already has very tight schedule, lots of rules, lots of things going on, when you add something new into a program, they have to find ways to incorporate it, so there were a variety of challenges there. There are also sociocultural challenges, which is when you ask someone, what are these digital badges for? Why do they have them? Kind of how it impacts experiences outside the program, how they share it with others, and that sort of thing. And then the technical challenges, which everyone in this room has faced technical challenges. You don't want to admit that your system will occasionally mess up or fail, but it's an important consideration because it really affects how your stakeholders and how the people using the system will interact with the system. If there's an initial problem the first time they log on, they can't log on, they're going to have a certain opinion of how the system works that continues despite it, even if it works every other time after that. If the first time they use it, it messes up, they're not going to be happy. So those are the 3 main categories of challenges we surfaced. I'm going to give a couple of examples. I don't have time to dive into each of our subsections here. They're in the paper, but we're going to provide 2 little cases here. The first example I want to provide is the sociotechnical challenge of access. In terms of actually logging into the badge system and using it, the students have a very tight schedule that they go through at the Science Center, and often they may not have time to access the badge system. They may not think about accessing the badge system because they're quite busy. So when we talked to them, we asked them when is a good time. So we had a design session where they mapped out their schedule. They helped brainstorm different times, different tasks. They were like, okay, we can take 10 minutes to build a portfolio. We can take 15 minutes to check these badges. We can do this. So we worked very closely with them to actually kind of design scheduled time within the badge system within the schedule to provide time for them to access the badge system. They actually have something in their schedule which is called hammer time. As you can see here, this is actually the hammer time board, and it's all these short activities that they can do during their scheduled hammer time. Stop hammer time, yes, that's the joke. So they have a choice of these various activities on the board, and since we had that added to the board, now they can have time to access the badges and remember to access them regularly. So the strategy was to, therefore, incorporate the badge system into the schedule, make it an enmeshed part of their day-to-day activities, which seems fairly straightforward, but until we did that explicitly, until we made sure that it was there, we talked to the students regularly, and sometimes they weren't checking their badges. Our second example is another sociotechnical challenge, this time focusing on awareness. And it also incorporates a couple of the sociocultural challenges, which I'll get into in a bit. But the challenge was that because this project has been running for several years, the first couple of years we had students who were helping us in the design team. We had our co-designers, and they would go and talk about the badges. They would go and talk about the design process. They were very, cognizant of all the different aspects of it, and they were very familiar with it, and they would share it with their peers. Unfortunately, these are high school students, and they eventually graduate and go off to college, and then they're no longer in the program, and they're no longer talking about the badge system. So now that it's in the stage where we're still doing some design, but we're not doing kind of the intensive levels that we were previously, there's less awareness of the badge system. So we incorporated it into their trainings. They already have these trainings. This is not us imposing another training on some, high school students who are already very busy. This is part of their existing trainings. And we actually had them train each other. So some of the more senior students in the program who have a lot more experience and who want to work on their public speaking and teaching skills get taught how to do a training for the digital badge system. And then they train the younger students who are just introduced to the program, and they teach them about the badge system. And we also give a little badge for completing the badge training, which is this badge up here. Additionally, they have a tradition in their program where they have lanyards, where they have pins on them. So we made pins of this badge because it was part of their tradition to have these pins. So now they have a pin to remind them of the badge system and also to be part of their traditions because it's very important to build this rapport with the community. So this not only contributes to the awareness, but it also helps them understand the value and relevance because it's explained to them by their peers who are also in the program. So there are a lot more of these discussions and examples in the paper, but I would like to talk about a few of our main recommendations for long-term implementations of either digital badging systems or other similar sociotechnical systems. One of our recommendations focuses on making sure that the stakeholders have a sense of ownership of whatever is designed. Once they feel that it belongs to them and that they're part of it, they will continue to use it as opposed to something that was introduced by outsiders. If someone comes from outside and says, here, use this technology, they're going to look at it and they're going to think about it and see if it's worth changing their current operations. But if they feel a sense of ownership, they're more likely to engage with it and continue to use it. Also, make sure to incorporate the values that they present to you and make sure to have those discussions around the values. We tried to use the pins, we tried to engage with their culture, use whatever terminology they used, tried to become very close, which ties into our next one, which is education, which we focus on teaching them not only about digital badges and learning from them about how their program operates, but also giving them the language to discuss digital badges with others, because one of the things that arose often was, nobody else understands what these are, how do we get the credibility and the understanding? And so we provided them with the language to discuss that, and now they can educate each other, they can educate their parents and families and teachers. And the last part is building this rapport. And over several years, we've built a very extensive rapport with the students as well as their supervisors so that we can have very honest and upfront conversations. When something is going wrong, they are happy to tell us. They don't kind of hand wave it and say, oh, no, it's fine. They will tell us when something is going wrong. They're very honest about it. So all of these things are very important. And so those are some of our recommendations summarized. They're elaborated more extensively in the paper. So to conclude, I would like to go back to one of my earlier points, which is a focus on implementing sociotechnical systems over the longer term. Often we see pilot studies, we see initial implementations, which are very important, but we don't see the longer term effects. We don't see what happens after it's been introduced, what happens over the next several years, how that works. So we want to focus on how you can use design, and you can continue to use design through a longer implementation in order to make sure you have a system that will actually last and actually function for the community that you're working with. So thank you so much.
Questions?
Hello. Thanks for your talk. I was wondering what was the purpose of the badge system, because the only badge you actually explained was the badge they got a token for to put on their ribbon or whatever. And you kind of said yes to force them to look at the badge system by putting it into the hammer time breaks. So why is there no incentive from the badge system itself to tell the students, hey, you got this badge, and for the student to see, oh, did I reach this badge yet? So I didn't quite understand the purpose and the integration of the badge system into this other learning system. Can you maybe elaborate on that, please?
Yes. So in the Pacific Science Center, they have a number of levels for the students. So they begin as Discovery Corps assistants, and they move up through different learning pathways. So the badge system is a way of digitizing those learning pathways, which were previously analog and on paper. So this provides a way for them to visually see which badges they've achieved, which positions they've achieved, which they need to achieve in order to advance in the program. So that's kind of what this maps onto. So it's the existing learning pathways in the program. So this allows them to check them at home, because previously they had to go to their supervisor and go get the big paper binder, and look through and see which things they had. It's called checking out on once you've been trained in a position, and then you're qualified to do it at the Science Center. So once they checked out on a position, previously they had to go check in with their supervisor and look through a big binder of papers and see which positions they checked out on. So now they can go look at the website and see which ones they have. And if they have anything that they're missing or that they need to work on, they can look at it there. They can send messages to their supervisors and that sort of thing. And in terms of them checking it, it's not that they have to. They have the option to check it during hammer time. So it's not you have to do this. It's that reminding you that this is an option for you to do. It's to raise awareness and allow them to access it and incorporate it as their schedule. They're not being obligated to do so. It's just a reminder, this is here, maybe check on it occasionally. You don't have to check it constantly. It's just you want to see which badges you're missing, and you want to see what you need to work on. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Dean. Thanks very much for the talk. Really interesting. One thing I was very curious about is that it's been shown when the gamification has been implemented in different systems or in online communities that it can have a motivating factor, but some of the core components like tables and badges, if they're not used very carefully, can actually disincentivize people. If they give them an initial kind of bump in interest, but if they're not properly managed, it can drop off massively. Since you've been doing a long-term study, have you seen that or noticed how things that would make it last longer, have any of them actually had a negative impact on the students or the participants?
So for the most part, we haven't seen any negative impact. I do think it's interesting because when we interview the students and talk to them about, do you like having badges, do you not like having badges, some of them have brought up that they love being able to see because they can see each other's badges in the system. It's not public for everyone, so not everyone can go look at their badges, but other students in the system can look at each other's badges. So some of them commented that they don't like the competitive aspect, and some of them have commented that they do like being able to see it. But overall, I haven't seen a strong difference in motivation, but we would have to look at that more specifically. It's partially because a lot of these badges are part of the program requirements, so they can see which ones they've earned and which ones they haven't, but I haven't seen any particular change in motivation particularly. I've seen a lot of interest in, what badges other people have and, how to earn certain badges, but not a real shift in, not a big peak and then a drop off.
Yeah, so just out of curiosity then, so the introduction of the badges, what was your core motivation yourselves for doing it if it wasn't to drive motivation in the students and participants?
So we're looking at different ways that after-school programs and other informal learning environments can be credentialed and allow students to give credentials to non-traditional learning methods. So a lot of the times students who do informal learning don't get as much kind of credit for doing those types of things as they would for doing, school and college courses. So we're looking at different ways that non-traditional education methods can be turned into credentials that will allow these students to add them to resumes or college applications and use them as an educational tool and share their learning across settings. So there's the gamification element, but there's also a very strong learning element that we're trying to incorporate.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Then thank you all. I guess we'll do a head start for the coffee break. But before you leave, please let's thank Caroline and all our other speakers for a super informative session. Thank you so much.